Good morning. My name is Kathleen Cahill, and I'm the chair of the Worship Arts Committee. This morning, the subject is inhaling Salt Lake City. And we have some very wonderful, dedicated people who are going to speak to us this morning about an important issue that's facing us here in Salt Lake, the proposed inland port. But first, I'm going to light the chalice. Symbol of light, symbol of knowledge, symbol of warmth, symbol of freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love. So the proposed inland port on the shoreline of the Great Salt Lake City. Should it be built, we will be inhaling the environmental pollutants of the inland port for decades to come. If you don't know what it is, the people who are visiting us today will tell you what it is, why it is, how it affects us, those of us who live and breathe here in Salt Lake. We breathe it, our city. We breathe it in and out. Everything that is Salt Lake City is in the air we breathe. You may have noticed that we have a problem with our air. Do we need more air? We have plenty of air. The problem is the air we breathe in order to continue to live is becoming bad for our health. What are we going to do about it? Well, some people want to make it even worse. That's not true. They don't want to make it worse. They just don't believe that what they wanted to create in this city is going to affect the air we breathe in a negative way. They will argue the point. And they will talk about progress. Not air quality, not quality of life, or anything else except progress. And money. More money. They are excited about the developmental opportunities. On the list of what matters, air quality and quality of life are not at the top. This is politics. And underneath politics is something deeper. Underneath politics are dreams. Dreams about a better life for a few, for some, or for all. Progress is a kind of dream. When a lot of us in this church were growing up, we heard the word progress used a lot. Progress is our most important product. That's what General Electric always said. And the phrase from the same time, what's good for General Motors is good for America. Industrial progress, capitalism, development, more. More and more and more. More is always good. That philosophy is under the idea of the inland port. Underneath politics are dreams. I've always been a daydreamer, and I love words. First of all, I thought inland port was kind of a lovely phrase. A port, from the Latin portus, a place of safe arrival, a haven, a harbor. But of course, the inland port is no haven. It's the opposite of a haven. In fact, it's an example of all the wrong thinking we keep doing as a culture and society. Inland ports are nature polluting. There aren't any non-polluting ports anywhere in the world. They all cause environmental damage. They are part of the culture of more. There's an old movie from the 1940s, Key Largo, where Edward G. Robinson famously says, "You know what I want? I want more. Yeah, that's right, more. That's what I want. He's a criminal and a gangster. Now, a man I think is a criminal and a gangster is in the White House. He's the leader of the culture of more, the culture of never enough, because there's no such thing as enough, even though it gets in the way of everything that is alive on our planet. Well, when I'm clicking away on Amazon.com, I sometimes feel like I too can never have enough. Thinking about the meaning of words, Amazon. The meaning of an Amazon is a tall, strong, warrior-like woman who orders stuff. The inland port is for trucks and trains and even airplanes to deliver the stuff, because we can never have enough stuff. Never enough. Really? This morning, instead of more, we're going to talk about enough. Enough as in enough is enough, and enough as in sufficient, adequate, decent. We're going to talk about a different dream, a politics, a dream of enough that's good for our air and us and other living things.
Please stand as you're willing and able and join us for our opening hymn, number 1067, Mother Earth. You can have a handout. If not right underneath you, float by.
Good morning. I'm Tim Chambless, and thank you for being here today. Air quality is important to me. Breathing is important to me. And for all of us. I will speak directly to air quality, to over 40 years of breathing in Salt Lake City, and indirectly to zoning, to the inland port, and to the law. 1971, a Sunday, September 26, 1971, I arrived in Salt Lake City, and I saw poison in the air that day. Kennecott Copper's smelter, smokestack, and Magna was releasing black chemical waste across the Salt Lake Valley sky. I saw an environmental obscenity, a crime against humanity, a warning. Fortunately, 2 years later, the EPA shut down that smokestack smelter. Alas, that day I was driving a van with a green environmental peace sign on the rear window. Ironically, that 1971 day, my van was burning leaded gasoline, which was polluting the air. My intentions were good, but I was polluting the air. During the 1970s in Salt Lake Valley, many days, we could cut the filthy air with a knife. Many a day, the air was like thick gravy, or perhaps like wet cement. Many a day, public school children were kept inside, not allowed to play outside. TV weather people described filthy air as haze, fog, smog, inversion. Maybe you've heard those words recently. Never as poison, never as a danger to breathe, and or an obvious public health crisis. But business people then, politicians also, said pollution was necessary for good jobs, good economic growth and development. In the late 1970s, I worked for Salt Lake City Mayor Ted Wilson. He was concerned with air quality. Ted wanted a cleaner, natural environment, along with good jobs and economic development. He knew Salt Lake City and Utah were landlocked. That is, Utah was a capital poor state. We didn't border on the Pacific or the Atlantic Oceans, on foreign borders of Mexico and Canada, not on the Mississippi River, not on the Great Lakes. We were landlocked. And so he knew that the Great Salt Lake had wetlands and could never be a deep water port. But we were hearing continually from businessmen at the Salt Lake Area Chamber of Commerce and elsewhere that there were plans to bid for a future Olympic Winter Games to come to northern Utah, and plans to somehow export Utah coal and copper to foreign countries far away. The exact words, inland port, were not heard. Economic development was the phrase. Today, 40 years later, pollution in this valley is far worse. We see days when Salt Lake City's air pollution is rated the worst in the United States. Causes: over 50% from cars and trucks, plus trains, airplanes, about 40% from buildings, and also from pesticides. Some days we can only see a few blocks. Some days, only one block. And we cough. Whatever we call it today, northern Utah's air quality is damaging our lungs, threatening our children, endangering our senior citizens, harming all of us. Today, Salt Lake City's population at night, midnight, weeknight, is about 200,000. In the valley, Salt Lake Valley, about 1.2 million, Utah's largest county. Today, a majority of the members of the Utah State Legislature still want continued mining and oil drilling in beautiful special areas in Utah, and to ship Utah fossil fuels to foreign countries. March 7th, 2018, almost 2 years ago today, the Utah State Legislature, late at night, the night before the last night of the session, quickly passed House Bill 234, entitled Utah Inland Port Authority Bill. The governor signed it March 16th, 2018, and it became law immediately. However, it's also in the courts, lawsuits under litigation. If built on open space wetlands by the Great Salt Lake, then our air quality problem potentially will be greatly compounded. To conclude, I would ask you to have a historical perspective, to think problem solution, to see the ramifications of short-term economic gain in contrast to the long-term threat to public health. I agree with these words of the German statesman Wolfgang von Goethe. There's nothing more terrible than ignorance in action. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is ignorance. We must not choose to remain ignorant, to ignore the human-made poison in our air. Poison in our air, killing all of us, and if we cannot breathe safely, then we will die painfully. I think of these words by Thomas Jefferson, eternal vigilance. And I think of these words, the final words heard on his deathbed of Frederick Douglass. Agitate, agitate. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Robert Broadhead. Happy to be here today. What is an inland port? There's a website called votesmart.org that provides free factual information about officials' positions on various subjects. And at this website, you will find various statements of what an inland port is. And you will begin to appreciate as you study these statements the need to distinguish between facts and flim-flam. For instance, here are a couple examples. First lie. There are no inland ports in the western United States. Well, there are two inland ports. One of them is a massive inland port in San Bernardino and Riverside counties in Southern California, and it includes a cargo-dedicated international airport. A second lie: Phoenix is contemplating building an inland port. Well, Phoenix already has an inland port. You can see it driving west from Phoenix on Highway 60. The Phoenix Inland Port is served by two railroad systems and two interstate highways, all of them running north and south, west and east, and it's also served by the Sky Harbor International Airport. A third problematic statement: Utah will become the crossroads of the West with a new inland port. Sorry, Arizona Inland Port System already describes itself as the Western hub and the gateway to the West. Finally, the state of Utah has already agreed, this is a statement, to meet or exceed Department of Environmental Quality standards. All that I have heard from state officials is that the port will be green, but there is not a green inland port anywhere in the world. There are these ports are environmental blights. Drive to Phoenix, it's only a day away, and drive on Highway 60 out of Phoenix, and you can see the port, and you can see the blight that the port consists of. Nevertheless, inland ports are sold as solutions to the environmental pollution and congestion created by seaports, and they're all connected in some way or another to a seaport. They allegedly allow seaports to move the explosion of cargo away from the coast in an expeditious manner. But the solution of an inland port can quickly become a problem in its own right. For example, the inland port in Brisbane, Australia, was built to prevent a tsunami of trucks and trains delivering cargo and picking it up at the seaport. It did this by moving the tsunami of trucks and trains to the outback, to an inland area that no one especially cares about, or that is away from, and that is well away from people in sensitive environmental areas. However, Salt Lake City's northwest quadrant, where Utah's inland port is proposed to be, is not in any way like the Australian outback. It's where thousands of people live, on the shoreline of Great Salt Lake, where there's an extraordinary abundance of wildlife living, especially birds. The location of many inland ports is seen as a good example of environmental racism. This includes the location of Utah's proposed inland port, which is a home to the majority of Salt Lake City's communities of color. In Southern California, the tsunami of trucks, trains, and planes, plus the huge equipment that moves these cargo containers that are as large as railway cars, was solved, as it were, by the creation of the Inland Empire Port in Riverside and San Bernardino, a facility spread across thousands of acres in these two counties. But the port is set in valleys surrounded by numerous small mountain ranges, and it has become an area that has the highest levels of particulate air pollution and ozone in the nation. The Inland Empire's port has become a massive problem in its own right. Now, to relieve this now problem of the Inland Empire Port, California officials in 2002 built the Alameda Corridor. It's a 20-mile cargo train expressway connecting its seaports with the national rail system near downtown Los Angeles. In the corridor's midsection, it's a massive concrete trench running underground. It's 30 feet deep and 50 miles wide, and it runs trains that have triple-decker cars on them. Alas, in the November issue, 2019 issue of Railway Age, it's a journal I'm sure you have at home on your coffee table, a 14-page analysis asked the question, is the Alameda Corridor a problem? It appears that the solution to the problem of the Inland Empire Port, which was itself a solution to the problems facing California's seaports, is also becoming a problem environmentally, financially, and logistically. In Salt Lake City, the construction of an inland port on the shoreline of the Great Salt Lake will not be a problem later or eventually. Its construction will be a problem right from the beginning. It will begin polluting the water, the soil, and the air from day one. And it will continue to pollute as long as it operates. The pollution in all its forms will not simply hurt the thousands of people who live in the northwest quadrant of the city. It will affect everyone who lives in the Salt Lake Valley and all of the wildlife. This is what an inland port is on the shoreline of the Great Salt Lake, a grotesque, hazardous blight. Thank you.
I neglected to present the announcements, so I'm just going to say them now, so we'll just take a little moment to pay attention to this. 2 weeks ago, Reverend Monica preached about the immorality of the private prison industry and the proposal to build an immigrant detention facility in Evanston, Wyoming. There will be a public hearing about this topic this Saturday, February 29th at 5 o'clock at Mary Jackson Elementary School on 200 North. Allies in Salt Lake City opposed to the new facility will gather to sing songs, hear stories from affected people, and resolve together to work together to stop it. Saturday at 5. And if you're new to the First Unitarian community and would like to learn more about our church, we have 2 newcomer events coming up. The first is the next in our newcomer series called Beyond Inquirers. It will be held on Sunday, March 8th at 12:30 in the Haven, which is the high school room upstairs. We'll have bagels and coffee and a topic related to Unitarian Universalism and time for questions and answers with Reverend Monica. The second is our UU orientation with Reverend Tom and Reverend Monica on Tuesday, March 10 at 7 o'clock here in our fellowship hall. We do ask that you stop by the welcome table to register for that class so that we can be sure to prepare enough materials for all who attend. And now I would like to thank you for your generous offering.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Deeda Seed. I work with the Center for Biological Diversity, and I'm also, I guess, the lead organizer with the Stop the Polluting Port Coalition. And I'm here to tell you what we're doing to stop the polluting port. It's been almost 2 years since we started working to stop the harm from the proposed Utah inland port. And I'm happy to tell you that in that time, our numbers have grown so that we are now a force to be reckoned with. And there are many people sitting here today who've been involved in this effort, and I want to thank you so much. The news that the Utah legislature intended to take control over development of 16,000 acres of land within Salt Lake City to develop an inland port was a shock. And first we had to figure out what an inland port was, and you've heard a little bit about that this morning already. Then we had to figure out why political leaders were intent on this takeover. So we researched inland ports, learning that there are enormous freight transfer facilities, that there aren't any clean green ports, they're incredibly polluting. And we also learned that the inland port envisioned for Salt Lake City is planned primarily for 7,000 acres of undeveloped land next to critical Great Salt Lake wetlands. Clearly, this will damage the Great Salt Lake ecosystem and our air quality. We'll be faced with thousands of additional diesel trucks, trains, and automobiles. A conservative analysis found we could be facing upwards of 11,000 new truck trips a day and 23,000 new daily car trips. This would exceed what we're experiencing right now. Obviously, this will also increase greenhouse gas emissions. And to make matters worse, port supporters have touted it as a site of fossil fuel transloading facilities. It's also an example of environmental injustice. The closest communities facing the greatest harm from this are our most diverse and least wealthy communities. And included in that are the 3,000 prisoners who will be out there in the new prison. And finally, there's the lack of transparency and accountability in this process and the sweetheart deals for development interests. As you heard, in March 2018, this bill was passed on the second to last day of the session at 9 p.m. The Speaker of the House, Greg Hughes, introduced and passed this with virtually no debate, and thus we had the creation of the Utah Inland Port Authority. Later, he named himself to the board. He was intending to become the chair of this body. However, in the rush to pass the legislation, he failed to realize he was ineligible to serve due to a conflict of interest. And that's sort of the story of this whole thing. People who are interested in developing this port have a financial interest in it as well. It's really been a travesty ever since in terms of in terms of transparency and accountability. So last year, the legislature passed a bill extending the power of the Port Authority throughout the state, allowing for the creation of satellite ports. And now, this year, we are facing another inland port bill, Representative Francis Gibson's House Bill 347, which would lock in property owners' rights to develop an inland port, requiring them only to adhere to 2018 zoning ordinances, which are clearly inadequate to deal with what would come from an inland port if it was fully developed. So what have we been doing to stop this project? We've been organizing. And two of my colleagues speaking with me this morning are among the stalwart leaders who've been working on this since the beginning. We've been educating ourselves and others and growing our coalition. We created a webpage. You can go to stopthepollutingport.org and get on our mailing list. We've created a social media presence. We're tabling and speaking at events. We're mostly a volunteer-powered effort, but we have the most amazing volunteers. We've attended every official forum and meeting associated with this ill-conceived project. And last year we hosted a half-day community forum attended by hundreds of community members. We brought in people from out of state who are experts on what these projects can do to communities. After being told for over a year that a report would be forthcoming addressing our concerns, and we still don't have that report, we decided to research and write our own report, which we just recently released, and there'll be copies out there. Unfortunately, it cost $8 to print each one, so we're asking for a donation if you want a copy. We held a Repeal the Port rally just a few weeks ago at the beginning of the legislative session, and although the day we chose also ended up being the day of our recent epic snowfall. I mean, waking up in the morning and seeing this much snow, I was like, oh no, no one is going to come to our rally. We had over 200 people show up. And that is a sign of how much people hate this project and how willing they are to stand up and fight against it. And people keep showing up. We are living in challenging times, but people keep showing up. And new people are joining all the time. And that is a cause for great hope. Organizing and inspiring action are the antidote to despair. This is the catalyst for hope. The best organizing is organic, working with the people who are drawn to an issue, and then engaging in co-creation of a movement and community problem solving, experimenting and saying yes to ideas more than saying no, honoring the skills and talents of many. Through this work, we can build the kind of community we want to have, one that is truly committed to sustainable development, to clean air, and protection of the amazing Great Salt Lake ecosystem. This is what we're doing here with our work to stop the polluting port. And who are the helpers who are creating this web of connections and activity to build the sustainable future we want? All sorts of people: artists, writers, educators, scientists, health professionals, the faith community, lawyers, planners, architects, economists, engineers, teachers, bird watchers, naturalists, librarians, administrators, students, retired people, dreamers, doers, and the courageous people who have put their bodies on the line in acts of civil disobedience to stop this project. We are looking at all of our options, including litigation, working to get people elected who support our position, and we had a recent victory. New Salt Lake Council member Dan Dugan ran on an anti-port platform, and he won, beating somebody who was more pro-port. We will tenaciously and persistently keep at it because all the possibilities of a sustainable and healthy future are before us when we work together. So I would like to invite you, if you're interested in joining us, we're going to have an organizing meeting this Wednesday night from 6 to 7:30 p.m. at the Sweet Library. And every Thursday at the State Capitol at 9 a.m., we meet in room 210 of the main Capitol building to lobby legislators. So thank you for all you do. And we're not going to give up. You're going to hear in a minute more about the harms from this, but I am absolutely convinced that working together, we can stop the polluting port.
Good morning. My name is Heather Dove, and I'm president of Great Salt Lake Audubon, an organization that actually has quite a few of you guys as members. We here in Salt Lake City and northern Utah have some of the most amazing natural treasures in the nation. We have the Wasatch Front, so gorgeous to look at and to play in when the air is clear. We have the deserts and mountain ranges of the Great Basin, those beautiful expanses of muted colors and shapes, filled with plant and animal life that has adapted to desert dwelling. And we have the Great Salt Lake, the largest geophysical feature in the state. And along with the Great Salt Lake, and because of the Great Salt Lake and its intricate network and variety of wetlands, we have 10 million birds who visit and utilize the lake every year. 10 million. Think about that. It's why the Great Salt Lake is considered not just a hemispherically important bird area, it's considered a globally important bird area. It's the largest of the terminal salt lakes of the West, these critically important salt lakes that are all in decline due to drought and human-driven water diversion. And think about those 10 million birds in the context of the recent report that a third of the world's birds have been lost in the past 50 years due to climate change, drought, and habitat fragmentation and loss from human sprawl. And what have our legislators done to this precious treasure? In 2018, they signed into law a most destructive and unnecessary project, the Utah Inland Port, situated at the southern doorstep of Great Salt Lake, right smack dab in the path of the flyway these 10 million birds have used for millennia. Salt Lake City and northern Utah have undergone enormous change in the past 10 to 20 years. The valley has basically hit and maybe even surpassed capacity. Our air is very polluted year-round, one of the 7 worst air sheds in the nation, according to a new analysis that compared hundreds of US cities. Our traffic is snarled and congested. Our roads take such a punishment that UDOT is unable to keep up with all the repairs. Our available housing is scant, especially our affordable housing. And even so, with all the building of apartments and houses and multi-unit dwellings wedged into every available bit of square space, the developers, despite their lip service about the need for low-cost, affordable housing, keep erecting dwellings that command above market rents and price tags. We've also experienced sprawl and development all along the east side of Great Salt Lake. Along with the south end of Great Salt Lake, these are some of the areas most important to and most utilized by the birds. We've lost so much habitat in the past 10 years, it's just shocking. And now the Utah Inland Port is about to decimate 16,000 acres of critical upland and wetland habitat located on the south end of Great Salt Lake. And for what? For low-paying warehouse jobs, even worse traffic congestion, even worse suffocating air quality, and an even greater squeeze on available affordable housing. And why? So that a few wealthy landowners and developers can take advantage and make a load of money. Do you know who the 2 largest landowners are now at the Inland Port? The 2 that bought up most of the smaller landowners so that they could engineer a sweep of all the money to be made? Colmena is one. This is the real estate development company that has been developing those huge towers in Sugar House that are really going to add to traffic and congestion in an area that's already packed. And the other, of course, is our friends at Rio Tinto, the 2nd largest mining company in the world, a company that netted $13.8 billion in profit after taxes in 2018. It's the company that is responsible for much of the air, ground, and water pollution in this valley since 1887. The company that has said it's developing the inland port because it wants to leave the Salt Lake Valley a legacy. Some legacy. Instead of developing this land that they bought at mitigation prices and are now selling at top dollar development prices, they should be using it to improve and conserve the wetlands and playas. After all, they owe us 133 years of reparations. We do not have an economic crisis in northern Utah. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the nation. We don't have enough workers for the jobs available currently. We do have a crisis of overcrowding, of growth, of traffic congestion, and a lack of housing. We do have a crisis of air pollution. We have the 7th worst airshed in the nation. And we do have a crisis of habitat loss with all the urban sprawl that has taken place along the shores of the lake. The inland port is an egregious, reprehensible, unnecessary, and unwanted project that will squander our remaining treasures. A few wealthy individuals will profit, and the rest of us will pay for it and suffer. For 2 years, we've been asking for answers to the hard questions of how wildlife and people of this valley are going to be protected from all the harms this project will bring. There's been an utter lack of responsiveness. We've been offered nothing substantive. There has been a complete lack of information and a very disturbing lack of transparency. There is now a great urgency to have our questions answered. The public has repeatedly and unequivocally stated that they choose no development over the prospect of low-paying warehouse jobs, suffocating air pollution, noise pollution, light pollution, and increased traffic. We have received no satisfaction from the Inland Port Authority Board. And so we are asking, for the sake of the birds and the sake of the people of the Salt Lake Valley that will suffer the environmental consequences, we ask the legislature to repeal the inland port. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Brian Moench. I'm the president and founder of Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment. The last time I spoke in church was about 25 years ago, and I hope it's a different outcome because I was asked to never speak again. It's a different church, but if so, I won't have to prepare as many talks, I guess. Like many of you, I'm an enthusiastic breather of air, and that's the reason why I want to talk to you today. In 1847, my pioneer ancestors entered the valley and declared this is the place. 173 years later, our political and business leaders have declared, again, this is the place to make a lot of money. This is not the place to breathe. That's a little different twist than our pioneers' ancestors applied to the situation. Robert quoted, Frederick Douglass, the famous 19th century statesman and abolitionist. I want to quote him again. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have the exact measure of the injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. Quietly submitting to the inland port will bring us that, quote, exact measure in the form of the worst injustice and wrong that Salt Lake City might see in our modern history. We now live in a world where evidence, science, facts, truth, logic, common sense, and objective reality have all become endangered species. We don't just live in an age of normalizing alternative facts. The very stable geniuses on Utah's Capitol Hill live in an alternative universe. We also live in a world where the rich and powerful and the politically connected write public policy to increase their advantage and their wealth at the expense of everyone else. And there is no better example of both of these pernicious trends than the dirty energy inland port. Behind a smokescreen of words like sustainable, the greenest ever, net zero, and electrified, the port's Pied Pipers want you to think that the second coming of the Green New Deal is upon us. But in the real world, it's just a zombie return of the brown old deal. We are driving full throttle to the edge of the cliff where the climate crisis will imperil every person on Earth. But the port's Pied Pipers say We don't need to worry about that. We can ship even more dirty energy out of the state, more coal, oil, and gas, more tar sands and oil shale, and it won't accelerate the climate crisis. They might as well ask us to believe in Bigfoot. The Port Pied Pipers want us to trust them that adding 10,000 more diesel semi-trucks to the valley, 20,000 more computers, hundreds of more plane trips, dozens more smoking train locomotives won't affect the air you breathe or your health. What they're asking us is to pretend that air pollution is just pixie dust, and it doesn't matter. Well, air pollution is hardly pixie dust. It's deadly. It matters. All of it. There is no safe level of air pollution you can be exposed to. Now, there are a lot of other things that there's no safe level of anything you can be exposed to. Things like lead. We're all familiar with that. There's really no safe level of benzene that you can be exposed to. There's also no safe level of country western music you can be exposed to. I'm an anesthesiologist, and I work in the operating room with surgeons, and if they want to play country western music, I have to tell them honestly, scientifically, the patient requires more anesthesia. I require anesthesia. But for those of you who like country western music, you should know there's also no safe level of opera that you can listen to. Or rap. There's no safe level of rap you can listen to. There's also no safe level of Sean Hannity you can listen to. And lately, there's been no safe level of Chris Matthews you can listen to either. Every bit of air pollution is a death sentence to someone or a trip to the hospital for someone else. No one can escape it, not newborns, not school children, not pregnant mothers, not the elderly, the sick, or afflicted. A recent study, in fact, showed that 99% of the deaths due to air pollution occur in communities that meet the EPA standards. In other words, the air pollution problem that we have is not just winter inversions. It's year-round. It's on days when the air seems clear. And the official government warning is, it's green. We're all good to go. Within 15 minutes after inhaling these tiny particles, those particles show up in your bloodstream. And then shortly after, in virtually any organ in your body, any cell in your body can be penetrated by these little invaders. We know the air pollution you have breathed in January, much of it is still inside your body in April, and it's still causing biologic damage. Between 1,000 and 2,000 Utahns die every year due to our air pollution, and more will lose their lives because of the pollution from this port. How many more lives is it okay to lose before this becomes immoral? 10? 50? 500? To put the pollution that we anticipate in context, studies of the LAX port have shown that all the diesel equipment at the LAX port, not inland port, but seaport, all that equipment puts out as much pollution as 480,000 cars. That is half of all the cars registered in the state of Utah. The Port Pied Pipers say, trust us, we'll make 20,000 acres of prime mosquito habitat tolerable for living people and working at the inland port. And how will they do that? They'll plaster it with pesticides over and over every summer, year after year, and pretend that it won't drift over the entire valley. They might as well ask us to believe in unicorns. Pesticides in general, in particular those used for mosquito control, are toxic to the brain and associated with a wide range of neurologic and brain diseases, especially impaired early brain development, loss of intellect, and behavioral disorders in children. For some pesticides, brain damage has been found at the lowest detectable dose. What this means clinically was revealed in a study showing pregnant women exposed to high levels of pyrethroids, that's the kind of insecticide that was commonly used against mosquitoes. Those children scored significantly lower on intelligence tests 3 years later. The brain damage was comparable to what occurs with lead toxicity. Think Flint, Michigan. The inland port will reprise the tragedy of Flint, Michigan throughout the Salt Lake Valley. And like lead, the damage is almost certainly permanent. Most pyrethroid compounds are also endocrine disruptors and can interfere with fertility and fetal development and cause birth defects and cancer, even in future generations. Pesticides now contaminate our air, our drinking water, our food, and our soil. They are detected on the top of Mount Everest and in the deepest parts of the ocean, and in rainfall from the sky. Pesticides are universally found in the blood and urine of almost all human beings everywhere, in newborn babies, and in mother's milk. While contamination is global, for Salt Lake Valley residents, the most important place to reduce chemical usage is in the valley itself. Mosquito control, as it is all too often done, even in Salt Lake City, cannot be written off as safe, especially in neighborhoods near the port. It is yet another ugly, inconvenient truth of the inland port. Clearly, the expected consequences of the inland port are fairly simple. You have on the one hand the assets, which are a few thousand, perhaps permanent jobs, many of them not permanent because technology will likely make robotic developments change the number of jobs in that port. But let's say we'll give the proponents the benefit of the doubt. A few thousand at the most, generally low-paying jobs. That's about the only benefit. Here are the costs. More aggravation of the climate crisis, more pollution, more traffic congestion, even a push to double-decker I-15, more population growth, loss of water resources, more pesticide exposure to everyone in the Salt Lake Valley, disruption of the Great Salt Lake ecosystem and loss of bird habitat, more water pollution, more international smuggling and drug traffic, and the loss of a greater economic stimulus, which would be cleaner air. Now, because this is a church, let's talk about charity, empathy, morality, and family values. There is no greater immorality and no greater contradiction of family values than a public policy that enriches the few at the expense, the suffering, the illness, and the deaths of the many. Thank you.
Please join us for our closing hymn, Blue Boat Home. Stand, please look at me.
So thank you, Tim, Deeda, Robert, Heather, Brian, and Ben for your celestial drums. The air is clear in your heart. As Unitarians, I believe we pride ourselves on our awareness, our knowledge, our understanding of social problems and situations. And it's difficult to come to terms with them, especially this inland port. It seems so enormous, but we shall overcome. Although as a Unitarian, I am not always great about moving from awareness to action, I know I need to do better, a lot better, and I know that I can and we can show up. And I know we don't quote from the Bible very much in this church, but I heard this quote on Netflix. It's from Isaiah. The Lord asks, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" Isaiah doesn't hesitate in taking the opportunity. Here I am, send me. We can stop this port, send us.